Yeah, just a really big welcome to everybody to what is now the 19th Transformational Change Learning Partnership Working Session. With this webinar focusing particularly on CIF's operating model as I suppose a learning space for country platforms. Just a quick thought on the format of this session. I'll provide a very brief introduction with some insights from our guest speaker, Jacob, who I'll also introduce, and then really an opportunity for some questions, discussions on deepening the transformational intent and impact through this emerging focus on country leadership. So maybe just as a quick kind of background, at the latest COP30, there were 40 new country platforms and a country platform hub that were announced. And I think that what we're seeing here is this kind of signal of intention to reinvigorate country-led implementation and climate action. And then I think that Jacob will really help us to understand how CIF's operating model has sought to move beyond standalone projects towards country-led investment plans that strategically link multiple interventions behind transformative vision. And the Transformational Change Learning Partnership, this partnership was established to really understand and deepen and support this transformational change across the climate finance sector. So it's not just within the CIF, but really the many sort of partners that make up this sector. So what we really hope to do through these working sessions is to learn from previous work on the programmatic approach and transformational change, and through this to provide, I suppose, stronger foundations for our work on country platforms. In particular, we hope to use this session to both understand the foundations, the potential to deepen transformational change in this re-emergent focus on country leadership. And to support this exploration, we're joined by Jacob Toppel, who is CIF's External Relations and Partnership Lead. Jacob will shed a bit more light on CIF's operating model, the lessons that we've learned over the last 17 years, and their relevance to supporting country-led transformations. With a strong focus in international development and external relations, Jacob brings many years of insight gained through work in the CIF, the World Bank Group, Global Affairs Canada, and with many partners around the world. So what we'll do now is just have a brief input from Jacob, sort of 10, 15 minutes. And then, as I've said, this opportunity to ask some questions, to consider some questions that we'll also share and to really engage in discussion. So with that, I'd like to extend a huge welcome to Jacob. Thanks for joining us and to hand it over to Jacob. Thanks very much.
Wow, thanks, Mike. That's a kind introduction, and it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here and to connect with this group. As Mike noted, I oversee partnerships, fund mobilization, and related strategy and external relations more broadly for the climate investment funds, and have been doing so for close to 6 years, actually. And before that, have spent, as Mike noted, over 25 years in development and humanitarian assistance and work on climate, mostly with as Mike noted, the Canadian government, the former Canadian International Development Agency, mostly in the field, South and Southeast Asia. But have given all that up to join the CIF because I truly believe in this model. And for those of you out there who might need a refresher on who exactly the CIF is and how we fit in, most of you may know we're in fact the largest pool of concessional finance that directly supports the major AAA rated G7 backed multilateral development banks to push them in their ambition in the climate space. And we're currently capitalized over $13 billion in terms of pledges and commitments to date. For 17 years, we've partnered with more than 80 developing countries enabling them to crowd in investments and transform their energy systems, build climate resilience, and protect natural resources. We deliver exclusively through the World Bank, the IFC, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and EBRD, housed in London, enabling them really to pioneer and scale clean tech and climate solutions. For every dollar that the CIF invests, we expect to mobilize over 10. And in that clean tech energy space, it's in fact around 12, 1 to 12. Since what's really important, what distinguishes us from the rest of that alphabet soup that you hear about in the climate space, the GCF, the GEF, the AF, and now the FRLD, it's hard to keep up. Some of the key distinguishing factors here is that since our inception, our approach to investment has hinged on coherent country coordination and implementation. We've always operated with a country-led programmatic model. We don't predetermine allocations of our funds by region, country. We don't operate on an ATM basis, first come, first serve. It is always based on demand and led by countries, putting countries in the driver's seat, giving them choice, agency, and flexibility to design investments that tailor to their needs. And we believe that maximizes bankability and impact. A couple of other key distinguishing factors to point out here is we work directly with ministries of finance. Not being an official UNFCCC financing mechanism, I would love to hear from the audience here what in fact that really means, because obviously in our founding documents we serve and support the Paris Agreement. But we work directly with ministries of finance and or central agencies. So, and that helps, we find, with integration and mainstreaming these investments into fiscal frameworks at the country level. And as it's done under a unified national vision. We work in partnership with the MDBs, as we noted, bringing policy, technical expertise, and financial capacity to de-risk and scale up those investments. Now, when I talk about these distinguishing factors, what's key here that underpins this entire approach of the CIF is the principle of ownership. And ownership, as you all know, is the essence of these country platforms. Country platforms, in that manner, really, despite all the attention to them within the last couple of years, it isn't a new concept, as we all know. Dating back to the Paris Principles on Aid Effectiveness in 2005, the follow-up Accra Action Plan, the push on poverty reduction strategies, PRSPs, swaps, and then JEPs. Again, the principle that cuts across all of these different acronyms is ownership. And the recent attention to country platforms in the climate and development space is really just a renewal of that concept and philosophy. That building coherence around sectoral investment priorities requires a country to secure and maintain political agreement, political will, coordinate public finance from multiple donors, and hopefully harness private investment. The JEPs, initially in South Africa, followed by, I believe, Indonesia, then Senegal, Vietnam, others, are a form of country platform. And it was aimed at mobilizing finance to advance the coal transition specifically. CIF has been providing critical support to those JEPs. The G20 Brazil presidency revived this country platform push and the discussion leading into the COP30 presidency, and has been useful in highlighting the need for closer coordination, bringing governments, MDBs, and national development banks, the private sector together in a country-led approach to mobilize finance at scale and to translate those priorities into actual action. Brazil's prioritizing country platforms and the launch of its own provides both momentum and a demonstration of how this can be done, and is helping mobilize partnerships and support. We believe CIF's experience in this realm can work to support future country platforms and even strengthen them and enhance them. CIF, we've built our next generation of investments based on the lessons we've achieved in this space of working on programmatic approaches. We believe we can offer partner countries seamless integration within a powerful, well-established MDB system. Based on some of our learnings include pushing planning support, technical assistance and readiness, de-risking and co-financing, stakeholder engagement, and ultimately using Mike's team and his army there on evaluation and learning to strengthen the MEL systems within these platforms, promote shared evidence bases, and support South-South learning and interoperability among all of that alphabet soup I referred to. Now, I think I'm speaking for a while, but just to let you know what CIF has been doing in this regard, because we are recognizing that the ODA envelope is shrinking. We recognize that with just about 2/3 left of the pot, that private capital mobilization is going to be key to sustaining some of these investments. In January, we raised $500 million from capital markets through a new capital markets mechanism that we established, with a view to supporting developing countries to transform their energy systems. I don't want to gloss over that. That was a huge ODA evolution. We are the first multilateral climate fund to access capital markets with the stewardship of Prime Minister Starmer that allowed us to get listed on the London Stock Exchange, and with credit ratings of AA1, AA+ by Moody's and Fitch, respectively. We believe this is going to complement our work and our support. We're also looking at a high-risk investment modality to directly catalyze private capital to clean tech and infrastructure in parallel to those funds mobilized on the market. But CIF isn't just in that space. We're in resilience, adaptation, and nature. And we've recently launched, as some of you may know, a successor to our pilot program on country resilience, which went on for 17 years and has been evaluated with results achieved surpassing all original targets. We have a better branded name this time, not PPCR, but instead Arise, Accelerating Resilience Investments and Innovation for Sustainable Economies. And we're hoping that Arise will mainstream resilience investments into national economic strategies and actively target private sector and private capital. We're not expecting it to be easy, and we're expecting to make mistakes. We're hoping we do, because from 17 years, we recognize that if we're not pushing the banks into these challenging spaces with our concessional money, we're not going to learn, and we're not going to be able to challenge the next frontier of investments. I'm just going to wrap up and note that, we know that one system can't solve the climate and development challenge. We need the rest of that alphabet soup to come together and to apply their respective comparative advantages. Beyond private sector, the MDBs and include other multilateral climate funds, right? The ones I've listed. And the Green Climate Fund with its readiness funding, or national development banks and their funds with their local resources and market access, all of these pieces will be critical. We've seen the most successful country platforms involve strong coordination across ecosystems, and believe that CIF can play an important role in that regard, in supporting country platforms that enable developing countries to properly plan and execute their developing strategies based on our lessons. And we hope with that this intro and this framing can help support a healthy dialogue here today. Mike, hope I haven't gone overboard. Back to you.
Yeah, Jacob, thank you very much for sharing, the thoughts of partnerships in taking these things forward. Certainly, country leadership is going to be key, but it is going to require many partners to work together. And in that process, of course, we will need to learn and learn our way, I suppose, into things that don't yet exist. And so these kinds of discussions are really important to ground them in work that we've all already done in many ways, drawing on the frameworks that we've developed through things like the Transformational Change Learning Partnership and elsewhere, in order to deepen the transformational intent and possibility in emerging country platforms and country leadership. So thank you very, very much for setting that scene. We're going to open it now for questions. Certainly, feel free to ask any questions, but also an invitation to make comments from your own perspective, from the spaces where you work. We'll paste some questions really asked to all of us of how we can enhance this work. But yeah, an invitation to ask questions, to make comments, to share thoughts, and to consider some of the questions in the chat, and then potentially to provide responses to those as well. So with that, yeah, just really opening it up. Please just feel free to unmute. Unmute. Don't worry about raising your hand. Just unmute and jump in. I think it will be able to coordinate it. If it gets too hectic, we'll revert to raising hands. But for now, just an invitation. Unmute and feel free to feed into the discussion. Thank you.
Mike, maybe I'll jump in.
Thank you, Niti. Welcome.
So, regarding the country platforms, is there a model which can be considered a best practice or a good standard? Because looking at the Just Energy Transition partnerships, of which two are in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia and in Vietnam. I represent Climate Action Network Southeast Asia. As you know, we've done an evaluation of the stakeholder engagement component of the JETP in Indonesia. So as an existing country platform, I think it leaves a lot to be desired. So is there a good model we can emulate if it exists out there? Thanks.
Thanks, Niti. Yeah. I mean, I think there may be different answers to this. I'll maybe answer in a way that opens up the potential for others to respond. I'm not sure that there's going to be one best practice. These things are country-led, which places an emphasis on the importance of context. So they need to be country-led because they need to be country-specific and contextually relevant. So the question, I suppose, is what might be attributes of better practice? What sorts of things would we like to see in the development of the country platforms that represent better practice, and they may be better in some places and not others. So yeah, really just opening it up. If anybody has some comments around what those attributes of better practice may be as we seek to support country ownership and country platforms. Yeah, really an invitation for others to jump in, both with suggestions and with questions. Thank you. feeling a bit like everybody's checked out for holiday already. So, no, just really yeah, feel free to jump in.
Maybe I can ask a question if I may.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So we all understand that country ownership is very key in the country platforms, but at least in most African countries, they see it as an investment platform where they can crowd in the different funding from different partners to serve the national development goals. But I mean, at least in the past, the way CIF operate, it's more like a programmatic approach where it's more about planning investment to achieve transformation at scale. So what will be the best approach for CIF? Are you, in terms of objective, are you planning to shift from this planning approach to a funding approach where other partners other than MDBs can also participate? Or do you think arranging the platform in a way that it serves, let's say, the transformative investment plan that you're introducing will be the best way forward?
Jacob, do you want to have a go at that one? I know that it is, I mean, there are partnerships across multiple institutions, including the multilateral development
Yeah,
banks. And Kato, it's
yeah,
great
Mike,
to have you here. So,
your voice is coming in clearly, but it was a bit broken up for me. Can you repeat the last part of your query? So sorry.
Let me get closer to the mic. Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better for me now. Thank you. It could be
Yes,
my,
yes,
I've been having trouble all week, so but that's helpful for me. Thank you.
yes, yes, no problem. So I was asking if the objective for CIF in engaging the country platform, if it will be, if it will remain at the planning stage where the country can plan what we want to achieve for a sector or for a country, and with seed funding in collaboration with MDBs, or if you pursue a model where other partners other than MDBs can also contribute in terms of mobilizing funding to achieve the country or sectoral goals.
Uh, um, well, for us, our funding is can you hear me? Am I off mute? Yes. Um, for us, our funding is paired and supports and de-risks allocations that the banks have at the country level. I like to believe that it also helps shape and drive and incentivizes countries to push into spaces that they want to go, but perhaps feel compelled because of the level of risk profile and financing available and instruments to be more cautious. In terms of being able to mobilize, yes, I mean that's part of the power of the CIF model is working through the banks, some of which are very private sector oriented, like the IFC, EBRD, IDB Invest, is that ability to crowd in and mobilize more easily by comparison to our peers. So while we will always aspire to put countries in the driver's seat on development of their plans, certainly yes, there will be a push to explore how we can make these more bankable. We have been working closely with the UNFCCC Secretariat that has, been revising their own NAPS processes. We have been consulting and doing a series of international consultations through 2024 and part of 2025 with the other MCFs. We recognize in that constrained global ODA world that if we're not trying to bring together these pools of concessionality to work as a system, then we are not only failing our recipients by leaving this very complex architecture for them to navigate on their own, but disincentivizing donors that in fact have created in part this mess. And it's important to try and unburden that ecosystem to ease the burden of access for those recipients. And so that's certainly our intention. Bringing together MCFs, looking at non-sovereign contributions, including from philanthropics, foundations, and as well private sector, private capital, but all within the context of a program through the MDBs. Hope that helps answer the question. Please do, if there's any follow-up, I'm happy to chime in again.
Yes, thank you very much. I was asking the question because I feel like there is an expertise and knowledge at CIF in developing investment plan, which could be useful for countries trying to establish country platform without being linked to a CIF program. I mean, if there is a window for CIF to support country establishing the country platform, that can help the country mobilize resources that might not be linked to the CIF, but at least that vision of transformation is there and it can support funding mobilization. That was the main objective of the question. But thank you for your response, which is very useful.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. I know that Brendan had his hand up, and I see John as well. Just maybe a quick thought as well, Kata, on this. I think that there are many role players in this field, and certainly the investment plan process that the CIF has supported in particular countries supports the country ownership and country platform notion. One of the things that we've seen a lot in our evaluations, though, is that it's quite difficult to sustain that coordination beyond the initial planning. In other words, as the projects start to be implemented, you often see this fragmentation of the coordination. And I suppose one of the things that we're going to need to look at, and I suppose this is a bit of a response to Niti's question as well around best practice, is to try and sustain that coordination through the program implementation. And Kata, to your point, I think that things like GCF's Readiness Fund, the kind of programmatic support and investment planning support that CIF provides, various other kind of mechanisms need to be brought to bear, and they will play out in different ways in different countries. So I think that there are other resources to support this kind of planning, including the multilateral development banks work in the diagnostic work that you do in countries. So all of that, I think, needs to come together to support the planning, and then somehow we need to work together much more collaboratively to support country ownership and country platforms through implementation. So maybe that's also a part of the response that we're all trying to develop. I'm going to hand over Brendan. I see your hand was up, and then also Scott has a question in the chat if anybody wants to have a go at that. But Brendan, over to you, and then John, over to you.
Sure. I also put my question in the chat and happy for folks to engage with it there. I guess it was a bit of a response to Niti's initial question and Mike, your response. And it's just wondering if kind of given the political economy of energy transitions, of kind of more inclusive climate resilience, if there are some tensions between country ownership and country platforms and some level of kind of inclusion of the priorities and needs of climate vulnerable communities, and therefore whether CIF and other actors have an opportunity perhaps to influence or inform or support participatory mechanisms, of which there are now many, but they seem rather kind of peripheral to country platforms, I think, at the moment, to perhaps build some bridges or at least point in directions where some of those participation and inclusion kind of mechanisms, transparency, accountability to kind of climate vulnerable communities might get integrated into country platforms, and perhaps through CIF kind of programming or other support. So just it's a question for us all to also just mull over whether, as we shift rightfully to country leadership and country platforms, how do we ensure some of the inclusiveness and participation that might not be as automatic as we might want it to be.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Brendan. I think that there are a number of tensions emerging. I think that the one that you touch on is absolutely key, and I suppose that part of it involves broadening our concept of country. So, if we talk about a country platform, is that only government? Are we talking about government platforms, or are we talking about country platforms as representing the interests of a broad range of stakeholders? And I suppose part of our work is going to need to be supporting a broad range of stakeholders to contribute into the country platforms meaningfully and to have their voices not only heard but kind of being able to influence the way that the country platforms are shaped. So absolutely, I think a key area. Certainly from an evaluation perspective, we're starting to have a look at building the capacity of key stakeholders to engage with evaluative work, country evaluations in country-led evaluations, to both influence them and to engage in them. And Niti's mention of the evaluation that they'd conducted on the stakeholder engagement around the JETP in Indonesia was an example of that kind of capacity development process. So, yeah, but happy to have others chip in as well around that question. Any other thoughts on Brendan's comment before we move on? No? Okay. Well, we'll pick up some of that discussion as well later, I'm sure. John?
Oh, hi. Yeah, very, very interesting discussion. Yeah. I mean, I think having worked at the World Bank and having grown up in Brazil and then worked for the World Bank in Brazil, worked for the U.S. government in Brazil, and other countries in Latin America, what strikes me is that it's just a very complex issue of country ownership because it sort of demonstrates the gap between the global to the local. The CIF has very progressive policies about, collaboration among ministries, collaboration with the MBBs, and then trying to involve non-state actors, local stakeholders in the process. And those policies are pretty advanced for many countries around the world, and so what really matters about country programs is what the context is in the countries. And I think the first element that I think of is diversity. I mean, there's just 200 countries around the world, and so every country has a different approach and experience when it comes to these policies. What's the governmental culture? Is it a top-down culture where the Ministry of Finance sort of calls all the shots and the other ministries just have to sort of follow along, or is there a horizontal kind of approach where ministries function well together? What's the historic experience of the MDB in that country? Some MDBs have more collaborative approaches in certain countries, less in other countries, and it also depends on the country context. And then the capacity of governments to not only implement the project, but be willing to collaborate with local stakeholders. And then the final element that I always see is the democratic legacy, because basically what we're talking about here is democratic governance, where you have the CIF, channeling through the MDBs and then working with different ministries and then the ministries that local government work with local governments and communities to make more participatory and effective development occur. And so each country has a different legacy when it comes to that. So I think like as Niti mentioned, even though the country program looks great on paper, and as you yourself said, Michael, it's in the implementation phase that really matters because that's where all of these issues come into play, I've heard that there are certain country experiences that the CIF has had that have been more more effective in that way, and others are more of a challenge. But it's all the whole process is a challenge, and I do feel like the international development community is moving forward, and countries have more democracy today than you've ever had around the globe. So international development is having a good impact there, but it's still, I think we just need to be open to admit that it's always a struggle, a challenge, I should say. It's always a challenge, and it depends on the country context. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Jacob, I see your hand up. Do you want to respond to some of those? I thought you might also want to respond to Lad's comment in the chat.
I was hoping to comment a bit on Brendan's as well as on Lad's. Brendan asked, do we see an opportunity to encourage and model greater integration of transparency, participation, accountability in country platforms? I think we do as part of our existing model, which we haven't, I don't know if we've always fully taken advantage of. For those who don't know, once we raise sufficient capital, and we're able to issue a call for proposals and IPs start to be developed, that initial scoping mission of an IP ends up being somewhat of a marketplace. And that's what we're trying to reframe our engagement at that level as. We're noticing that while the GCF and Jeff and CIF and everyone at the 10,000 foot level can sign a climate action plan or a joint action plan at that level, it's very difficult politically between all their boards to be aligned with each other. But at the country level, in these scoping missions, which I like to view as kind of a marketplace, once the CIF team hits the ground and starts working with the Ministry of Finance and the relevant sectoral ministries, Jeff, GCF, adaptation folks, even other multilateral organizations, they come together, including private sector and CSOs. And we notice it working well. We noticed it working well through our Nature, People, and Climate program, our Nature-Based Solutions program led by Paul. Rwanda is a very good example of this, where there was a multiplicity of stakeholders that came together. And I would encourage you guys, we can share those findings with you. And there was great collaboration with the other MCFs, which really actually shows how we can maximize the use of this highly scarce concessional money. To Lad's point about, isn't this what the CIF has been doing? Yes, in fact, that's kind of part of our point. I think the reason the GCF is now talking about country platforms is because our greatest export to the GCF was our former CEO, Mafalda Duarte, who in fact, really helped champion a country programmatic approach with the CIF, recognizing quite early that this is our greatest asset, which is sad that we're relying on this old principle, which we all should be championing, which is putting the countries in the driver's seat. And now we're hearing over the last year that the GCF, as part of their revamping, are trying to champion a programmatic model for themselves, and that's great. So if the reason why you don't hear more about that is when you're a fund that doesn't have a replenishment cycle and you're outside of the UNFCCC, it's very hard to get onto the radar of a lot of developing country actors that don't see CIF presence on the ground, and because we're just a small secretariat here, and to donors that don't feel compelled to have to go up to their ministers making business cases for one fund or the other. That's a challenge, but Mike sits on 17 years of rich a rich knowledge library here, which really needs to help shape and inform countries as they explore this new pathway. I see, Lad, that you've posted a second question here. I'm also driving the government platform, the role of other stakeholders.
Speak a little bit about
Yeah.
yeah. I guess really, I mean, it's great that CIF is getting this leverage of 10 to 1 or even 12 to 1 in some cases. And that is a real accomplishment. But I guess there would be a concern that it might, that you might have some kind of private sector capture if, a lot of this money is coming from the private sector. I'm just wondering about, the other interests that are being represented. When you're relying on leverage to that degree. Although, I mean, maybe this is governments. I'd be interested in the breakdown, where those dollars are coming from, private sector, public sector, other third parties. Thanks.
I can quickly respond. I mean, when we talk about leverage, it's about mobilizing additional sources of finance. It's not all private sector. And it obviously depends on the nature of the investment, right? Whether we're talking about nature-based solutions or a clean tech. Obviously, the latter tends to yield higher mobilization ratios. And we've struggled in the Strategic Climate Fund that has pushed resilience, nature, not struggled, it's just been harder. And in fact, Arise has as one of its goals and aspirations to try and address that challenge. We think that is the next frontier. If ODA is a dying industry, then we better figure out how we can make these, how we can look at vulnerability and highly vulnerable countries, whether it be SIDS or LDCs, LICs, and support their NAPs and support the investability of their NAPs. As long as we are this tool through the MDBs, we have to push them into these spaces. During New York, UNGA High Level Week, we had the honor and the privilege to meet the Prime Minister of Sao Tome and Principe. Now, while they're a SID out in the west of in the Atlantic to sub-Saharan Africa. He referred to themselves as not sub-Saharan Africa. He referred to themselves as forgotten Africa, which because not only is their aid pool shrinking overall, the envelopes are going down, but many donors and many banks don't view them as bankable. And so if this private capital mobilization is the new flavor of the in aid and assistance and climate finance, well then we have to use our concessional financing through Arise to help address how we can crowd into these spaces. And Chitembo and her team are looking at a private sector facility to do just that. So let me stop there. Although, Mike,
thanks
to you,
Jacob.
I see Scott is trying to raise his hand. Perhaps you want to give
Scott, jump in and welcome.
Thanks. It's good to see some familiar faces. I mean, I'd like to reflect a little bit on my work. I mean, I like Mike's questions that he popped in there, bulleted, like, how does a programmatic approach add value to the country leadership and platforms? And then related, strengthening collaboration among, I would say, not just MCFs, but other actors. And I'd like to reflect on that based on my work with Mike and his team and a lot of resource development for what I would call practical evaluation and learning guidance, as well as the synthesis report that I authored, published earlier this year for the 4 funds, is a report called The Approach on Transformational Change in the Multilateral Climate Funds. And it was the 4, adaptation funds, CIF, GEF, and GCF. I think, to be practical about this, I think a systematic approach should be the big thing that I think is really important. And recognizing that there are two levels, and there are very many levels, micro, meso, and macro, but I see two levels at the country level. It's a balancing act between the local country ownership that meaningfully drills down maybe to what Brendan was talking about, the local communities and other actors beyond the national ministries and departments and such. And then the constellation of international actors and partnerships or lack of partnerships and coordination that is working with the country and has their own requirements and contingencies that they expect from the country. One thing that I have seen has worked that's really practical is, and this again is working with Mike and his team, is the value of systems mapping when the investment plan is being developed, and starting with the actors mapping, what I call actor mapping, not just stakeholder mapping, but also other actors that can influence what you're trying to do, who might not have a stake in it, but for whatever reasons they're gatekeepers or such, and they can influence it. And I think that's a key leverage point, because when you do that, then you can identify representatives from different stakeholder groups and actor groups to include in the investment planning. And that can be at the micro, meso, or macro levels as appropriate. One finding from the synthesis report, when you're looking at that balancing act I was talking about, not just the country level, but those that are going into the country, trying to work with the country, and that's not just CIF. And I learned this very early in my career with humanitarian response, where you have a large-scale disaster and a whole bunch of organizations running into that country, like Haiti after the earthquake, for example. And all of them have different expectations of the local actors and how they should report and what frameworks they should use and such. And one of the things that surfaces is the more that can be coordinated among those actors, and I know this is very idealistic, but it does make it easier for the country to better respond. For example, one of the findings in the report was developing a compendium of metrics and signals for transformational climate action that can be used across different sectors and contexts. And the reason we landed on menu is we realize that what is used will be different for each context. So it shouldn't be identifying one recipe for metrics and signals or whatever processes you have. But when you have a menu, then you can go in there and adapt it to that particular country. And ideally, some of that measurement and reporting can roll up and be used at the country level to help them report not just to the CIF, but other international actors that are involved in the response. So there's just a couple reflections on that. And then the other point was what I started off with. I don't want to be kind of like the annoying person asking the question, which is, the elephant in the room, but I'm kind of far from DC now. And it's very clear that that there is an agenda out there that's really the antithesis of supporting climate change, renewable energy, and such, even to the effect that using certain strategies or even terminology related to gender, social inclusion is now not in favor of certain major donors. And I'm just wondering, and not just for CIF, but for a lot of the major climate actors, how are you navigating this? And maybe it's not a politically correct question to ask, but it just seems there's such a contrast that's out there right now between where some of the large international funders or who used to be funders were coming from and how the landscape is radically changing. And so I'll stop at that. Thanks.
Jack, but I don't know whether you want to have a go at the really difficult one there. How do we manage these partnerships?
Thanks, Mike.
And 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 things in the current kind of political context, I suppose, and just whether you have any thoughts on navigating that, and then I'll do
Yeah,
some of the
no, it's
easy
a
stuff around how we deal with complex systems and things.
yeah, no. First of all, I want to thank you for leaving that with me. And then really grateful that Scott's here to raise that question too. But look, you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, this is it's hard to believe we're still in a space where we have to defend, what it is we do, but we do. We are. And the reality is we don't swim in a world of endless funding. And some of the donors you mentioned were in fact some of our biggest champions. In fact, the CIF, as you may recall, was stood up during a time of oh shoot, is my battery going to die? I'm just going to turn off my camera here because I think my battery is no, I'm okay. Was stood up during a right of center government in 2007-8. So there will always be different views and opinions, and that's the challenge of democracy, and that we have to roll with those punches. And but the work continues. Our values stay steady. How much we will yell and scream about them from the rooftops, that has to be gauged and managed politically carefully. And it's not just us going through this, as I'm sure you know. Our host country, our host bank, the World Bank, which is with whom we have a hosting arrangement, and we pay for trustee and treasury services. The president is struggling between European donors that are pushing for increased climate action and a host government that at one point was even threatening whether we were going to stay on in the country. If you go back to last spring. So it's a political juggling act. Whether or not you're hearing climate change action plans celebrated by the World Bank or not, their country action, their country programming models per country are still reflecting this work, as are we. We are not shy about what we're doing. The work has to continue, and that includes critical principles that make this work more sustainable and impactful, including social inclusion and gender equality, and addressing marginalized groups, including Indigenous peoples and local communities. Some of the work we've done with Indigenous peoples and local communities are amongst the greatest investments we've made, even though they may not have the ticket size, but they've changed lives. And, it's part of the reason we even were able to secure Dr. Jane Goodall before her passing as a huge supporter and endorsed that nature-based solutions program because of that work. That will continue as long as our recipient countries and clients prioritize it. The CIF will be there. Hope that's that's my weak attempt at trying to address the concerns. Over to you, Mike. Oh, I see Nithi has his hand up too.
Yeah, no, take a brave attempt. I think that what we've come to recognize is that although there are some countries and stakeholders that may challenge some of the work that we're trying to do, there are many that step in to the breach and really do support it, and we've seen that happening a lot as well. And I think that there's this kind of re-emergence of support for the work that we're doing. So yeah. Good. Niti, since you braved making the first comment, I'm going to also give you the last one. So over to you.
No, it's very interesting because in my opening query, when I said, are there good practices or models existing out there? I'm going to now suggest a good model which we in KNC are directly involved with. which also I think answers some of the aspects of what Scott was talking about of systems mapping and stakeholder mapping. This is regarding a just coal transition implementation program, which is going on in two of the most active coal mining regions in Indonesia. It's a partnership between the German government and the Indonesian government, funded by ICI, the International Climate Initiative of Germany. And it's run by a consortium. You've got GIZ doing the coordination. You've got ILO dealing with capital and government. You've got ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation, engaging with workers. And you've got CAN Southeast Asia, engaging with the communities through our member on the ground. And one outcome of this so far already has been the creation of regional consultation forums at the provincial government level. Of course, it's led by the provincial government, yet it is multi-stakeholder and it's institutionalized. So there are meetings every month. And because of the engagement of us with the communities, we've done the stakeholder mapping, and we are making sure that we bring the right representatives to the table. So like for ITUC, they bring the informal workers who are largely, lost between the cracks. And then we bring in, the vulnerable communities, the women, the people with disabilities. So that seems to be a model which could be emulated, And of course, one of the challenges is if the meeting, these are monthly meetings, the struggle is, of course, to get the affected communities. They've got a seat at the table. It's getting them to the table. They're working. They can't lose a day's wage. They've got small businesses to run. Yet I think it is a very good practice, I think, which can be documented and emulated. And because at the level of provincial government is where the transition away from dependency on coal is taking place, and that's where the platform exists. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you so much, Niti, and thank you everybody for the conversation, the insights, the comments. I think that what is coming through to me is that the kind of taking forward of climate action is going to need to be contextual. It's going to need to respond to country needs, and that the country platforms, country ownership is an important part of responding to that contextuality. These issues are also incredibly complex, which speaks to Scott's point around the need for systems mapping. And understanding who and how these systems are shaping up. They're also highly contested, which I think highlights the importance of what we refer to as procedural justice in the just transition work that we do. It's around whose voices get heard in these processes. And a couple of questions have come up around opening the notion of country beyond government, to say that procedural justice is going to require that multiple stakeholders are involved in this discussion. In sensitive ways. I think the issues are also, of course, emergent. They're changing quite fast and over time. Different actors are taking different positions. Different opportunities are arising. And we're going to need to learn to respond to this emergent context. We don't know the answers yet, but they will certainly kind of change as we go. So I'd like to really thank Jacob for sharing his thoughts, for contributing in. I'd like to thank everybody here for their contributions all year. Thanks so much, Jacob. And wishing just everybody a fantastic break as we go on a break. We won't have a TCLP Learning Partnership working session in January. We'll be back in February with the next session. And then just as a last point, if anybody's looking for some holiday reading to try and navigate this space between how we support a programmatic approach and at the same time engage a private sector quite quickly, and who shapes then the agenda. I think that I've really enjoyed recently Mariana Mazzucato's work, the Italian economist, and her work trying to talk about the difference between the public sector being market creating for the private sector, and the public sector's role as actually being market shaping for the private sector, and that the public sector needs to step in and to in these country platforms enhance the kind of social justice, inclusivity, and kind of ultimately sustainability as we move forward. So, with that little bit of holiday reading and this really inspirational time together, I wish everybody a peaceful break with family and friends, and thank you for a really amazing year of learning and developing together. Thanks all.